What's this? Supreme Court makes a new ruling about violence without committing violence. Yeah, so let's see what this is about.
In a new decision issued late last week, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that crimes of violence may be committed through inaction, meaning that moving forward, even if you technically committed no violent actions, you might have still committed violence under the law. Let's go through the details.
What? What? Really? Wow. That's gonna be crazy. That's gonna be crazy. That's crazy.
This case together. Although, before we begin, I will quickly mention that, speaking of crimes, on the back end of this YouTube channel, I can see that 41% of you are not yet subscribed. And I don't know about the technicalities of the law, but to me, that is an act of violence. And so please, like this video so that I can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm, and also consider subscribing to the channel. We report a lot of interesting stories that get brushed under the rug of the typical news cycle, and by subscribing, you support the channel, but also you'll get all of our episodes delivered directly into your newsfeed every time we publish them every single week. Now, getting back to the Supreme Court ruling, let me give you a brief background on this case. Back in 2017, there was a mobster by the name of Salvatore Fat Sal Delegati. He was operating over in Queens, New York as an associate of the Genovese crime family. And specifically, he was helping to run an illegal sports gambling operation. Now, Fat Sal was not the owner of the operation. He was just running it on behalf of a made member of the family. Now, what eventually happened, just like you see in the...
That's crazy. I didn't even know that there were mob bosses still active. Fat Sal. Be careful out there.
mob movies, is that Fat Sal found himself in a position where he needed to kill someone. Quote, Fat Sal Delegati had targeted Joseph Bonelli as a local bully who was terrorizing a gas station that Delegati and his associates frequented. The family also suspected that Bonelli was cooperating against the bookies in the neighborhood, which made him a potential threat to the family's gambling operation. Now, this official explanation is obviously vague, but suffice it to say, Fat Sal decided to take out Mr. Joseph Bonelli. But he did not want to get his own hands dirty. And so what Fat Sal did is that he used a third party to hire members of the Crips gang to carry out the contract killing. Fat Sal Delegati, he plays the order.
Bro, he hired some Crips? Damn. He hired some Crips. It's Crips in New York, Bloods and Crips all over, man. Damn.
And then he gave the Crips gang members a .38 revolver to get the job done. He basically subcontracted it out, provided the gun, but he did not want to do the killing himself, which is a point that becomes relevant later. Now, the police, they intercepted the gang members before they were able to actually carry out the hit, and then eventually, the feds, they figured out what had happened. They arrested Fat Sal Delegati in 2017 and indicted him on several charges, including the following: racketeering conspiracy, conspiracy to commit murder in aid of racketeering, attempted murder in aid of racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, operating an illegal gambling business, and, most relevant to our discussion, possessing a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence under Section 924C of the Hobbs Act. Now, a federal jury...
That's wild. He got all those charges. Bro. Damn. He got all those charges. That's crazy. That's crazy as hell.
In New York wound up convicting Mr. Delegati on all counts back in March of 2018, and he was sentenced to 300 months behind bars, which is 25 years in prison. However, Mr. Delegati appealed that ruling. His argument for the appeal was actually quite interesting. The last charge that he was hit with, the possession of a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence under the Hobbs Act, it contributed 5 years to his overall sentence. But Delegati claimed that he did not commit a crime of violence, and therefore that particular statute did not apply to him. Now, for your reference, quote, the Hobbs Act is a federal statute that prohibits actual or attempted robbery or extortion affecting interstate or foreign commerce, as well as conspiracies to do so. And then going into the specific subsection, Section 924C specifically authorized enhanced punishments for a firearm in connection with a crime of violence. Basically,
Damn. So he basically is saying like, well, I wasn't in possession of it, so I didn't commit no crime with that firearm. Damn. Let me see if he got off. He might have got off because of that. I don't know if he got off, but
That particular section, it allows for enhanced punishments if a perpetrator used a gun in connection to a crime of violence. This is what's known as a predicate. Quote, as predicates on which to base the charge, the government relied on 4 of the other charged offenses. A predicate is an event that takes place before an offense and serves as the basis for a conviction or sentence enhancement. And so, in plain English, it means that the prosecutors used as the predicate the other offenses that Mr. Delgatti was facing, such as racketeering, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, and so on. They claimed that those charges established the crime of violence predicate, and so on top of that, because there was a gun involved, that .38 revolver, they tacked on the last charge, possession of a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence under Section 924C of the Hobbs Act. And because of that possessed gun, he was given another 5 years in prison. Without that charge, he would have only been given 20 years, but with that charge, it was 25. And so Delgatti appealed that.
25. Damn, all of that, he got 25 years. There's people that deleted people when they got less time than that. But they always say conspiracy to delete somebody, it gets you more time than actually doing it, which is crazy. Premeditated, which is crazy, but it is what it is.
Decision. His argument was that none of the other charges qualified as crimes of violence under the law. Quote, Salvatore Fat Sal Delgatti challenged the 5 years added to his sentence tied to his 2018 conviction of attempted murder and other crimes. Delgatti said he never used the physical force required to meet the definition of a crime of violence. Instead, he said, he hired members of the Crips gang through an intermediary to carry out a killing and gave them a .38 revolver for the crime. Essentially, he was arguing that his conviction for attempted murder did not actually count as a crime of violence because no physical force on his part was used. It's the...
Damn, he admitted all that? That's crazy. I guess he had to if he wanted to get off. If he's trying to get off, you got to get him something, right?
Classical defense of the mob, where the higher-ups don't get their hands dirty and it's the henchmen who do. Now, his appeal bounced around the legal system for a while before finally landing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, who just last week ruled against Mr. Delgatti. In a 7-2 split decision, you had Justices Clarence Thomas, John Roberts, Sam Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Alina Kagan, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett reject the mobster's argument. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. Listen, it's obvious.
That's crazy they rejected that, John. That's crazy.
Writing for the majority of the court, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the following, quote, whenever someone knowingly causes physical harm, he uses force within the meaning of the law. The knowing or intentional causation of injury or death, whether by act or omission, necessarily involves the use of physical force against another person. Intentional murder is the prototypical crime of violence, and it has long been understood to incorporate liability for both act and omission. When the law was enacted, it was widely accepted that one could commit murder by refusing to perform a legal duty, like feeding one's child. Meaning that, according to the majority opinion of the court, an act of violence can occur even through inaction, which is a fascinating interpretation, which I'm sure the mobsters did not anticipate.
Yeah, I feel like that ruling is gonna hurt a lot of people, and it's gonna help a lot of people. That's a very interesting ruling because you basically saying that speech can be violence eventually, but they're basically saying, well, you put the wheels in motion, so you did commit a act of violence, because if it wasn't for your actions, it probably wouldn't have never happened.
However, it's worth mentioning that 2 justices did not agree with that line of reasoning. To that end, Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote a dissenting opinion to which Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson joined, wherein he gave an example of a lifeguard who sits idly by while watching someone drown in water and writes the following, quote, instead of leaping into action, the lifeguard chooses to settle back in his chair, twirl his whistle, and watch the swimmer slip away. The lifeguard is a bad man. In many states, he may be guilty of a serious crime for failing to fulfill his legal duty to help the swimmer. But does the lifeguard's offense also qualify as a crime of violence involving the use of physical force against the person of another? The court thinks so. I do not. Which is, frankly, a good point. Not trying to save someone from drowning as a lifeguard is obviously negligent, but is it an act of physical violence? Well, even though a common understanding of that term would make you think it's not, the majority decision of this court legally makes it so. Moving forward, you no longer have to commit an overt act of violence to meet the definition of a crime of violence under the Hobbs Act. But let me ask you, do you agree with this interpretation? Or do you think that the law should be clear and that violence should mean violence without interpretations like this? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section below.
I definitely think that. I don't really agree with that either. I think that's a bad ruling. I definitely think that if it should be an act of violence. It shouldn't be basically premeditated violence or whatever you want to call it. But I definitely think it should be considered it shouldn't be considered an act of violence if you don't commit an act of violence. I just don't. I think they should change the term or the name or the term of violence, because if I don't know, say something to somebody a certain way, or if I don't do anything to actually assist somebody, is that considered an act of violence? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just weird. It's weird, but it is what it is. Thank you for joining me. All right. See y'all. Peace. Bye. Sketchpad reactions. You know what it is.